So I originally had a rant here that I put past my patrons to see what they thought, and though the ones who responded said I made valid points and they were reasonable and everything else, they all kind of said the same thing where there's a very good chance that what I was saying, as valid as it is just going to go over the heads of the people that it's aimed at. So I thought, you know what? Let's not waste anybody's time. I'm just going to remove it and we'll just do a quick thing here. So to summarize basically what that rant was about, even though I'm still going to cut out quite a bit from that, was that essentially, if you're wondering what happened to the Harn video I did a year ago, where I said Harnworld and Harndex are disappointing because they came as loose leaf 3-ring binder papers, and it wasn't very clear that that's what they came as, and they cost 50 USD and didn't come with any PDFs. If you're wondering what happened to that video, I took it down because Columbia Games did contact me a little while after that, so I know they saw it, and then a few months later they changed their storefront to be more transparent about what you're buying. So I know they saw the video, I know that I had some level of impact on them changing their storefront. I'm not going to sit here and say that I take all the credit for it. I know other people are probably also pissed off, but I do know that they saw it. And because they made that change, it didn't feel right keeping that video up. Because that wasn't a totally valid video anymore now that they had changed that. They still have not given free PDFs with the things you buy, even though that's an industry standard. I'm not going to get into it again, but keeping it up didn't feel right. I didn't want to cost them customers on information that was no longer relevant, so it is now delisted. I will put the link to that video in the description of this one so you can still access it. I didn't want to, just scrub it off the face of the earth, but I just didn't want people stumbling across it and then thinking Columbia Games hasn't tried to make any changes, because they have. And that is essentially the entire rant for the most part. So anyway, with that now out of the way, let's move on to the review. So this is exactly the product I wanted when I bought the loose leaf version of Harndex and Harnworld about a year ago. One thing I do for relaxation in the warmer months is I sit on my deck and I read RPG books, and the Harn Kingdom books, the ones that I have right here, if the camera will pick those up, have been perfect for that. I've gone on the record before saying I'm not really a fan of deep RPG lore books. I'm not really a fan of reading indulgent lore and world building, that sort of stuff, but there's something about Harn that I find very magnetic. I think it's because I've always been a huge history fan, but running historical games has always been a nightmare because history fans are the fucking worst and refuse to give any slack to historical inaccuracy for the sake of entertainment. And Harn is heavily based off of our world and has a lot of the trappings of a realistic medieval setting, but other than the deep lore, all the books end at the year 720 in world, so not only is there no canon to follow after that date, but because it's not the real world anyway, you can do a lot more without people throwing a hissy fit because you would deign to let somebody play a female character with any agency at all. There's a very good chance that if you're in my audience, these books may not be in your wheelhouse because they might be a little bit more dry or a little bit less whimsical than what you might want, but I do think if you do want a really, really granular setting that you can turn up or turn down the fantasy in, you can take a lot of the detail or just leave it out. I do think this is a really good setting for you, and I think this hardcover is the perfect place to start. When I first got into Harn about a year ago, I was on Reddit and I was going through the forums and I was doing all sorts of things to just try and get a good idea of the world because it felt so deep and rich. And even with the Kingdom books and that, there still felt to be like a lot of gaps in my knowledge, and I feel like this book has really done a fantastic job of filling in those gaps. There's just so much detail in here while still staying really broad and easy to parse. This book is made up of several sections. The first section generally covers everything on the island of Harn. It goes over the different kingdoms, history, cultures, some of the monsters, government structures, law, weather, and a bunch of other things in varying detail. The second section, and the biggest, is Harndex, which is, as the name suggests, an index for everything you could possibly want to look up, whether it's just a monarch from centuries ago, cities, mercenary companies, or even a big guy called Noron. It is extremely helpful as a reference document. The next section covers the continent of Lithia, and to quickly explain, the setting basically just takes real-world geography and then does its own thing with it for the most part. Harn is essentially the British Isles, and Lithia is Eurasia and Africa. That's mostly where the similarities end, but then you have some one-for-one ripoffs, such as where Scandinavia is where Ivinia is in the setting, and Ivinia is where the Vikings come from. Ivinians are the Vikings, essentially. And the last section is Cathera, which is the planet and goes over stuff like the solar system this setting is in. So it goes from Harn all the way to the stars. And that's pretty nice. The last two sections are pretty small compared to everything else because you don't really need to get bogged down in like solar systems and everything else. They are really good to have, but for, a bunch of medieval mercenaries, there's a pretty good chance that they won't matter quite as much, but they are nice to have if you are into that sort of thing. The quality of the book is really, really good. It's like the other ones. If you have any of the Kingdom books, it's the same sort of thing. You have really nice, tonally consistent art, and you also have some really, really good writing. It can be really dry, especially some of the more drier content like, law and economies and that sort of thing. But overall, the stuff on the world building, like the different kingdoms and the people and some of the situations going on, I find that writing really captures my imagination for what I could do with that in a game. I know as an RPG reviewer, I'm supposed to know all the different types of print quality and all that sort of stuff, but I don't. I'm sorry. It's a nice hardcover book. In terms of quality of the paper and ink, the closest thing I can think of for it is offset print, and it might actually be offset print. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know all the different workings of what kind of printers people use, what kind of stitching people use. I'm just a guy who likes to play make-believe, so I do apologize if that's not helpful for your RPG collection. And this book is a chunky boy. I live in a basement apartment, so this has been fucking awesome for my rat problem. Anyway, I think the first two sections, the biggest ones, are the main reason for buying this book, and I do think if you are looking for an introduction to this world, they are the best place to start, especially in such a nice book. If you're looking to run a campaign in this setting, the book giving you a page on each and every kingdom can give you a good idea of where you might want to set your game. There's also a part at the end of the history section summarizing what the current events are at the end date of 720, and where I assume most people start their campaigns, detailing the political and cultural landscape of each section of Harn. I think one of the reasons why I like these books and the setting, and specifically this book, is that a lot of lore and self-indulgent world building can have so much stuff in it, and none of it is useful for at the table. A lot of it can just be super, super granular. Sure, it's really cool, but how do I use this? Whereas I feel like these books actually give you a lot of setup, a lot of things happening, a lot of different moving parts that make you go, if we're setting the game in this place, there's a lot here I could use. To give you an example of what I mean, in Eastern Harn, there are 3 kingdoms that are in a tenuous situation. Kaldor in the north is currently on the brink of a civil war as the aging king could die at any moment in the next few years and has not declared an heir. Further south is Meldurin, a fairly prosperous island nation which is known for having wizards and is the first stop on the Harn for most foreign trade. In between Kaldor and Meldurin is a tiny kingdom called Chibissa that both Kaldor and Meldurin have a claim on for reasons. Both do not recognize Chibissa as a sovereign state. Chibissa's leader is constantly worried that either kingdom will press their claim, causing the other kingdom to consider it a declaration of war and creating a 3-way war with Chibissa as the battlegrounds. There's more nuance and intricacies, but I think having internal and external strife is such a fantastic backdrop for a campaign, especially considering I haven't even mentioned like the hostile tribes or a lot of the bigger detailed stuff, all like the different factions and different people who might want things. I think the Kaldorian Civil War or the War for Chibissa aspects could work for campaigns following mercenaries or assassins or anybody who might be, paid to fight or kill or do intrigue, things like that that might work directly with the current conflict happening in that part of the world. And even if you aren't involved in those directly, I still think they make for great backdrops, if you're playing forest wardens who are going after poachers or treasure hunters who are dealing with complications from the events that are happening, maybe like a hostile tribe that is pushed into an area they're not supposed to be because of the war, or, dealing with weird, paranoid people who think the players might be spies or things like that. Or it could just be good for, flavorful tone changes to the world as it goes on. I just like that when you start your game, the setups have events in motion. Things are happening. It's not just a bunch of static kingdoms and NPCs with exclamation points over their head waiting for the PCs to come interact with them for them to actually move things forward. There's a world going on regardless of what the PCs do, and that makes it feel a lot more alive. It makes it feel like a lot more of a real world. I think it's one of those things where there should always be things happening in your world. It shouldn't just be like, oh, I have all these things, and I don't want things to change because I'm getting so attached to these worlds existing. I really don't want this kingdom to stop existing, but like, in a campaign, Chibissa could absolutely just stop existing in your world because eventually, Kaldor won against Meldurin or something like that, where they take over and now there's a new status quo, a new change to your world. And I like that these are set up to have those things happen potentially. And the rest of Harn is similarly rife with opportunity. All kinds of kingdoms have different problems and people they're dealing with. In the north, for example, there is the pre-feudal kingdom of Orbal, which is basically run by like 8,000 Avinians, who are like the Viking types, and they essentially have like this apartheid state with 85,000 Jarin or Yaran people who are currently starting to rebel and break out and start to fight back against the Orbalese people, or I guess Evinians. I don't know how you say it, but I think Evinians is the correct term for them. By the way, you have all these different problems that are happening throughout Harn. You don't really have anywhere where it's just static and staying the same. Meldurin's probably the closest to a place that has like a pretty, you know, stable kingdom, but even that has all kinds of weird intrigue and wonder because you have all these weird wizards and things like that. So every kingdom isn't just, you know, a different flavor of a medieval kingdom. They all do act differently, and they do all have different problems and different things going on in them for the players to interact with. Also, on every kingdom summary, there are a list of references of related articles, such as the kingdom books themselves, or specific locations such as castles and cities. So if an area in particular interests you, you have a handy reference of what other products to look at. So I do think if you want to run any games in the setting, I think this book is the best thing to get because it covers all the religions, the kingdoms, the people. It covers some monsters here and there as well. It covers weather. It covers everything you could possibly need. So between the broad overview and then the Harndex, which has more specific stuff that you can look up when you need to, it has you covered really, really well. Obviously, the kingdom books go into more detail on the kingdoms and the people that are in there. And then I know there's even more articles on every small thing, like stuff like potions or an order or some tribes or things like that. So you can get really granular with it. Personally, I think the kingdom books and this are probably the most I want. I might get some of the more granular ones here and there, but overall, I find these cover me really, really well for the stuff I want. And one thing I forgot to mention is that there's also an Elven kingdom and a Dwarven kingdom, but if you don't want those Tolkien aspects, which, by the way, go a lot deeper than you think, and that's a topic for another video, but if you don't want those in your game and you want just the medieval stuff, they're very insular kingdoms, so it's not hard to just remove them and ignore them. But that is the Harnworld hardcover. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have interest in the setting, I think by now, from what I've said, you should know if this is a setting for you if you want a granular, medieval, you know, very low fantasy, not really much magic. I mean, you can turn it up if you want to, but overall, the base setting feels much, much, much more grounded than a lot of other settings you'll see in RPGs. I do recommend this as the first book you should get, honestly, because from this, you can then see what other things you might want from this product line. Anyway, I hope you found this review helpful, and I hope you found the rant funny. I will be doing more videos on Harn eventually. I really do want to do stuff on the kingdoms. I would love to do some deep dive videos or things like that. But it is one of those things where like I've not had the time to do it. So I will get to those eventually, but it will probably be later on in the future. I just want to say really big thanks to my patrons. I really, really appreciate the support. You're all beautiful people, and I cannot say enough how much I appreciate the support. Anyway, guys, I hope you have a good one, and stay safe out there.